And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us for our first episode of the NBA trade deadlines, rumors, and news updates for you guys. We're going to do this daily for you guys every single evening, weekdays around 9 o'clock. So make sure you join us here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and join us here at the Upside Sports Network. If you're unfamiliar with us, we cover the NBA, MLB, NFL, and the NHL. We covered the MLB offseason, all the hot stove news that you could have ever wished for. You can check out all that information on our page, and we're still going to keep you updated on all that as it happens. Now at the NBA trade deadline right around the corner on February 9th, the NBA trade rumors are certainly hot right now. We'll get into those in just a moment. NFL playoffs are going right now. Dallas Cowboys got a big victory for the first time over Tom Brady. They'll try to take out the San Francisco 49ers this Sunday. We'll see if they have enough left in the tank. But should be a very entertaining playoff weekend in the NFL. And of course the NHL. The trade deadline is also approaching rather quickly for the NHL. We'll start some of those lives for you guys after the NBA trade deadline passes. But welcome to our first episode here. But let's kind of kick things off with one of the most active names out there on the trade market right now, and that's Bojan Bogdanovic. He is probably the most sought after trade commodity at the deadline this year. The LA Lakers, the Dallas Mavericks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, pretty much any team in need of a scoring forward has at least reached out to the Detroit Pistons. Now, as far as what exactly does he bring to the table, we've known he's been a good offensive player. This year he's been phenomenal shooting. Right now he's having a career high average anyway as far as points per game at 21 points per game. We'll see what he ends up bringing to whichever team he does get moved to. But the asking price from the Pistons has been pretty steady at one first-round, unprotected first-round pick, plus additional assets being young players or draft commodities as well. We'll see which way they end up leaning, but it sounds like there could be some activity. They're also willing to move Nerlens Noel here at the deadline. Alec Burks would be a very highly sought-after guy on the trade market right now. He's on a team-friendly deal, if you will, in what was originally thought as more of an albatross this offseason. The trade that they made with the New York Knicks to kind of free up salary space for them to sign Jalen Brunson in free agency, that's turned into a nice boon for them. Alec Burks is shooting, I think, 45% from three-point range this year. He's been a godsend to them, and they're looking to work out a long-term deal with him during this season, maybe in the offseason. But it doesn't look like anybody who's needing three-point shooting is going to be able to bring in one of the top 5 three-point shooters this trade deadline season. Now, of course, there's a number of teams out there looking to make some additions. Of course, you guys know my favorite team has been the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic's basically been doing everything on both ends of the floor for the Dallas Mavericks, but they just can't stop anybody from scoring right now. Defense has been terrible. Jason Kidd called them out multiple times over the past 3 weeks anyway, and they gave up 130-plus points, I think, for the third straight game. They've lost, I want to say, 4 in a row right now, something like that, 3 or 4 in a row. And they've performed well so far this year. They certainly are missing Maxi Kleber on the defensive end. The offense seems to be churning just fine without Jalen Brunson. They could use some improvements there as a secondary ball handler, somebody to take the pressure off of Luka. But as I mentioned, he's been doing everything for this team, and the reason why they have a winning record, even after their recent losing streak, is because of Luka Doncic. No team has played more close games than the Dallas Mavericks so far this year, and they just need somebody to either A, step up on the defensive end of the floor, or B, take some of the pressure off of Luka so that way he can have a little bit more energy late in games to close out a lot of those close games that he's just literally having to carry the team through right now. But Spencer Dinwiddie's been a nice addition to this team after the trade from the Washington Wizards. I'm curious to see which way the Dallas Mavericks are going to go here at the deadline. Are they going to try to go after defense? Think of the Rudy Gobert trade that went to the Minnesota Timberwolves last year as kind of as an angle for the way the Dallas Mavericks might want to approach it that way. If they decide to go that route, maybe they go after a guy like Miles Turner, who can still stretch the floor by shooting the three, but still very good on the defensive end of the floor. They're also said to not be willing to trade multiple first-round picks or any first-round picks unless it's for a star-level player that they can put next to Luka for years to come. They tried this in the past with Kristaps Porzingis. Understandable, the risk, etc., but obviously it didn't work out. They got a nice role player out of it now with Spencer Dinwiddie. Davis Bertans, of course, kind of an albatross of a contract, but he only is guaranteed, I believe, $5 million in the final year of that deal. So it's basically a year and a half plus that you have to end up paying him. Right now, you're looking at guaranteed money left on that deal, 21 plus whatever's left this year, so I'm guessing in the neighborhood of $27 million right now for Davis Bertans. That's the one big contract on their books right now that they need to get rid of. No team wants to stick around with a bad contract. Just look at the Atlanta Hawks right now. We put out a video today about the latest with John Collins, how his asking price a couple of years ago was 2 first-round picks from the Atlanta Hawks. Now, or about a year ago, it was down to a 1 first-round pick. Earlier this year, we heard it was down to a quality role player, and even at that price, the Atlanta Hawks have been failing to find a suitor for John Collins' contract. He has 3 years left on his deal, $25 million salary. It is a hefty salary. His shooting percentages have been terrible. He had a nice game the other day against Dallas, but sorry, it's just not working out for him. His career, I think it's next to his career low numbers, aside from his rookie year right now, 13.5 points per game. And it looks like the Atlanta Hawks are trying to showcase him a little bit over the past couple of weeks. Every nationally televised game, anyway, I see his minutes are up a little bit. And so I'm wondering if they're trying to showcase him and trade a little bit. But the DeJounte Murray trade hasn't exactly worked out the way they liked. But he's been a dynamic player for them. We saw the defense he played on Luka on ESPN the other night. He was fantastic. He's able to score the ball. He's really developed as an all-around player. Nice trade by the Atlanta Hawks to get him. But it was a pricey trade to get that done. They did send 3 first-round picks to the Spurs to get it done. They did get a first back for Kevin Huerter to go to the Kings. Another surprise story we'll get into a little bit later. But the Sacramento Kings have had a nice season so far. But the Atlanta Hawks have struggled to find a taker for John Collins. We'll see if he ends up being traded somewhere. But for right now, it sounds like the Atlanta Hawks are probably just going to have to hold pat or stand pat anyway and just hang on to him and hope his numbers bounce back. John Collins himself has said on multiple occasions that he's absolutely fed up with the situation in Atlanta. He wants out. He's tired of being subject of trade rumors for the better part of 3 years now, and we'll see where he ultimately ends up going. Of course, he can have nobody but to himself to blame for signing that extension, that big free agency contract anyway that he got. To re-sign with the Atlanta Hawks. It was on him. He had the choice to go somewhere else. Sure, he was a restricted free agent. He could have accepted the qualifying offer and been unrestricted the next year. He chose to take the big money, and you can't really blame him for that, I suppose, trying to get guaranteed money for your family's future. But you signed the contract. You have to live it out. You can't just sit there and say, woe is me. You have to make the best out of what you literally signed up for. And the reason why nobody's willing to trade for you right now is because you're playing so poorly. So we'll see if he's able to play a little bit better down the stretch. The one other solution I think we could see in John Collins' saga is them taking back an equally bad contract. Think of the bad contract of Davis Bertans right now for the Dallas Mavericks. That right now is a better contract than the John Collins deal with the Atlanta Hawks. There's a contract for the Brooklyn Nets anyway with Joe Harris. Maybe that contract could go the other way. Again, you'd probably have to give something up if you're the Atlanta Hawks to be able to get that done even. But it should be interesting to see where he goes here at the deadline, if anywhere at all. We touched on the very top of this show talking about Bojan Bogdanovic. We talked a little bit about how he's averaging 21 points a game. I'm very curious to see if the Detroit Pistons ultimately decide to keep him on their roster. He's been very good for that team, but they just aren't competitive yet as far as win-loss record, and so I wonder if now's the right time to either A, continue to shed pieces off of it, or now start to build something for the future. That's going to be the conundrum they have. They traded away Jeremy Grant anyway to the Portland Trailblazers this past offseason. So I wonder if they're still in a little bit of a sell mode. In my mind, I like the addition that they made, bringing Bogdanovich in. Very shrewd move, bringing him in from the Utah Jazz, only costing you essentially Kelly Olynyk and some smaller assets. But for all intents and purposes, Bogdanovich has been fantastic, and they should be able to reap a nice price for him at the deadline if they choose to sell him. If I'm the Pistons, though, I just wonder if he's the right fit that's on my roster right now, and so why would I trade him away if he's the right fit for my team? But moving on to the other news items out there, Kyle Kuzma is likely to be entering free agency after the season. He's expected to opt out of his deal after the year. It'll be very curious to see if the Wizards are able to extend his contract. It sounds like they would love to keep him around and have kind of a big four if they're able to trade for either a center, or B, a better point guard. That's kind of the one thing they'd really like to do. They want to build around Beal, Porzingis, Kuzma, and one other piece. They do have a nice center there in Daniel Gafford, but he hasn't really lived up to the contract that he signed over the last year or so, and we'll see if that ultimately proves to hinder them a little bit going forward. I wonder if Kyle Kuzma is going to be dealt here at the deadline if they cannot get a deal reached. If they can't get one, Kyle Kuzma would be a very good option out there. Think of the asking price for Bogdanovich. I'd expect it to be very similar for Kuzma. The other big news item out there is the Toronto Raptors. They're expected to sell here at the deadline. Fred VanVleet is also expected to opt out of his deal. The Raptors have tried to extend his contract already. They had a 4-year, $114 million offer on the table that he declined, understandably so, because Jalen Brunson, somebody who has been compared to Fred VanVleet anyway, in the past, he's been around the NBA a little bit longer. He's been a little bit more productive as well, and so I can understand why VanVleet would want a better contract than Jalen Brunson. So keep your eyes peeled for what happens in Toronto with Fred VanVleet. Outside of that, they have been shopping Gary Trent Jr. like nobody's business. He has not exactly been great this year. Shooting percentages have certainly fallen off a little bit. He's a little bit of a liability on defense because of his size, but that's going to be the same pretty much everywhere he goes. Don't get me wrong, he does give you some effort, but that size is the difficult thing for him. We'll see where he ends up going here at the deadline if anybody takes his contract. I imagine they will. He's still very young, but he's due $17+ million this year. He's still got another year left after this one, but he's still very young. So another team out there that needs some scoring punch at that 2 spot might be willing to take on the money of Gary Trent Jr. The other big news items from the Raptors, of course, are Pascal Siakam. Everybody seems to want to be trading for him right now. I think they're going to hold on to him unless they get an option that's just, star level player good. Other than that, I think Pascal Siakam is likely to stay. The other player there that every team absolutely wants, is OG Anunoby. The asking price right now is said to be at least 2 first-round picks. In some news articles, I've seen 3 first-round picks. They want a DeJounte Murray-type haul, from what I'm hearing. That's not going to happen. OG Anunoby is a very good player, very good two-way player, productive on both ends of the floor as well, and he's really kind of come into his own over the past year. But you're telling me that he's ready for stardom wherever he goes, telling me he's worth 3 first-round picks? That's what that ultimately ends up signaling, that he's worth a star-level player. He's a great player. He's a very good player. But he is not a star, which is why I think the asking price being 3 first-round picks is very rich right now. I do not expect him to go for that. Now, could we see him being dealt for, say, a very high-quality veteran? Say, for instance, my Dallas Mavericks, say that they want to improve their number 3 spot in their lineup and bring in OG Anunoby. You're looking at maybe a Dorian Finney-Smith going back the other way, comparable player, lower offensive ceiling, a little bit higher defensive player anyway, but is on a team-friendly deal, if you will. $12+ million is signed for a long-term deal as well, and maybe that would help lower the price, maybe give him a first-round pick, and maybe some other assets, but that could be a comparable deal. If you're a team looking to make a trade for OG Anunoby, that might be another way of going about doing it, rather than just giving up straight-up first-round picks for it, because as I mentioned, 3 first-round picks tells you he's going to be a star on your team. And while I think he's a very good player, I think he's a high-quality player on both ends of the floor, I don't think he's your number 1 option on offense. I don't think that he's your number 2 option on offense. I think he's very nice number 3 option on your offense as it stands right now, and so teams should value him accordingly. So if you need that type of a player to finish off your team, to try to make a run at the NBA Finals, so be it. Maybe you're willing to push those chips to the center to get it done. But I don't think any team out there can convincingly to their ownership group, we need to give up these 3 first-round picks to get this player because we view ourselves as an NBA Finals champion if we get this done. And I don't think any team out there can make that argument that would be willing to take on that risk and that reward, if you will. But we'll see what ultimately ends up happening with OG Anunoby. A number of teams are expected to make a call about him. I know the LA Lakers are literally looking for any way to improve their roster right now around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They basically realize that they have a 3-year window here to try to compete with LeBron James, to try to win one more title. They understand that they've kind of mortgaged their future. Their first round picks are basically tied up for the next several years. However, they could trade the 27 first rounder and the 29 first rounder. There's rumors out there about a possible Westbrook deal to the Indiana Pacers in exchange for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. I think you'd have to give up both first round picks, and even then I'm not sure it'd be enough to get it done. It sounds like Indiana wants to be able to re-sign Miles Turner anyway. Not Miles Sanders, Miles Turner. Sorry if I said that earlier. But Miles Turner is a very good center here in the NBA. Very good player on both ends of the floor. Great defensive numbers. Outside of Rudy Gobert, there's very few centers that put up better defensive numbers than Miles Turner. Wherever he goes at this deadline, if he gets moved, that team is sure to see a boon on their defensive end of the floor first and foremost. And then, of course, the three-point shooting. Somebody who can stretch the floor as a number 5 in the lineup. The LA Clippers are said to have interested in him as well. The Clippers are also looking at Mike Conley of the Utah Jazz. Put out a video about that today. They're looking to upgrade their point guard spot. They've been trying to do that for the better part of 3 years now. They've tried Reggie Jackson. They've tried using one of their forwards like Paul George, Kawhi, even Morris as kind of a point forward on their team. None of it's really worked. John Wall's learning to play a different type of a way with his team. He's used to playing like he did in Washington and Houston, kind of a slasher, get to the hole, create his own shot, that kind of thing. Now he's trying to learn how to be more of a spot-up shooter, facilitate for other guys a little bit more. It's a different way of playing, and he's adjusting to it according to their head coach, but it's going to take time for him to get all the way there. So we'll see if they ultimately hold on to John Wall or if they end up moving him to bring in another point guard like Mike Conley. But Conley's a name that's also popped up with the Memphis Grizzlies once again, also with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, the Timberwolves are looking to figure out what they need to do with D'Angelo Russell's contract. He's expected to hit free agency after this season, and they're not sure they want to extend him on a long-term deal or even if they'll be able to keep him. Now, understandably, D'Angelo Russell and Karl-Anthony Towns are close friends. Things have not really worked out, though, after the trade for Rudy Gobert, partly because Karl-Anthony Towns has been out of the lineup for the better part of 2 months. So we'll see when he does come back, how healthy he is, and of course, if they're able to make a rise up in the standings in the Western Conference. I'm sure they would love to get a comparable player to D'Angelo Russell, so there's not much drop-off, but that's very tough to do in a trade. One of the trades that we've seen where it is kind of comparable is the Dallas Mavericks rumors of Tim Hardaway Jr., who they've made available in trade. You can check out that video on our YouTube page as well, to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Caris LeVert. Now, Caris LeVert is likely to is going to be entering free agency after this season. He is a better all-around player than Tim Hardaway Jr. Tim Hardaway Jr., though, is locked up for 3 years. He's also a better offense, or he has a higher offensive ceiling anyway, but he's less consistent. He's more of a streaky type shooter, so you got to weigh the pros and cons of making that type of a move if you're the Cleveland Cavaliers. You have some commitments already made on your roster. You have a big expiring contract in Kevin Love. Maybe you go out there and get both of your big targets in Bojan Bogdanovic and Tim Hardaway Jr. just to kind of solidify your top 2 targets here at the trade deadline. Those are the 2 names that have been connected with the Cleveland Cavaliers that they really want to bring in. And Caris LeVert could be a very nice fit going back to Dallas, as he would give them some more consistent playmaking ability from a kind of a 2-3 type player. He hasn't played well as the number 3 in a lineup with the Cleveland Cavaliers because they have Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. But I imagine in Dallas, where he'd be allowed or more trusted with playmaking abilities, that would be a welcome addition for the Mavericks and for Luka Doncic. You've seen the rumors from Mark Cuban how an ESPN article came out the other day saying that Luka Doncic was asking the front office to say, hey, make an addition, do something, etc. And that just hasn't been true. Mark Cuban came out and vehemently denied that the second the article was published, and basically said he hasn't even been approached or mentioned it even to him or anybody in the front office. So I think this is a little bit more smoke from the media just trying to say, hey, he needs help, rather than actual sourcing on it. Welcome in, Cheesy. Appreciate you for coming back. Thank you very much. Doing pretty well anyway. Hope you guys are having a good evening here. Thursday evening. Again, we're going to be doing this every single day for you guys over the next few weeks until we hit the NBA trade deadline on February 9th. We'll still stick with our our baseball weekly updates for you guys. And if anything big happens, like say a Pablo Lopez trade or a Brian Reynolds trade, we'll probably go live as well for you guys that evening. A little bit more news out of the Washington Wizards is that Rui Hachimura is being shopped around the league a little bit. He is on the final year of his rookie deal, I believe. He is going to be a restricted free agent. He is a very productive player on both ends of the floor. However, he does have his injury issues. That's why he kind of struggled to open the year, and of course, is finally starting to come into his own. Had career high numbers over the past couple of weeks anyway. Multiple games where he set new career highs for himself in scoring in basically 3 out of 5 games. And so he's really kind of coming on. I think a team would be wise to snatch him up while his salary is so low, extend him before he hits free agency, or if he decides to go into free agency, you at least hold on to his rights because he would be a restricted free agent. Again, Dallas Mavericks need scoring. Almost every single one of these players I'm going to mention, hey, you're going to hear it. Dallas Mavericks need to make a move. I'm sorry, I'm just tired of seeing them sit back, bide their time, hope they build up a better roster and, build internally and all that. And all that sounds great. But at this point, you have no second star next to Luka. You have no answer on the defensive end of the floor. Changes need to be made. And that's part of the reason why Nico Harrison was brought in the first place. They need to get to work. Welcome back, Jose. I did see the Aroldis Chapman deal, 1 year, $3.5 million. I think it is a nice fit. I am very curious to see, though, if he actually breaks camp with the club. He was kind of mercurial with the New York Yankees last year. Got into it with Aaron Boone. Got into it with the team. Had issues with his own health because of an infection to his tattoo that he got on an off day, and things just didn't go well. It started off with poor performance, and then he rebounded a little bit. But Aroldis Chapman was not very good last year. He could be an option to not make the team if he continues to have those issues with the Royals. The other option, of course, is if the Royals are likely to be out of contention, they could flip him at the deadline to try to get 1 or 2 long-term pieces back in there. How my Raptors looking, and are Pascal rumors true? We talked a lot about the Raptors earlier in the video. We talked a lot about Fred VanVleet first and foremost. He was offered a 4-year, $114 million contract extension. He is expected to opt out of the final year of his deal and become a free agent after the year. And I think they'd be wise to try to trade Fred VanVleet, honestly. They don't really have an in-house option to really take his place right now, but I think the course has been run with Fred VanVleet as your lead point guard right now, and getting any additional assets back that you can, I think would be very wise. Now, could you go out there and sign him to a long-term deal? Absolutely. And I still wouldn't begrudge the Raptors for doing something like that. I just think it's time to move on from Fred VanVleet, reinvest in that roster, build around Scotty Barnes, etc. Now, as far as the Gary Trent Jr. Rumors are out there, they've been trying to move him for the better part of pretty much the entire season. From what I've been understanding, they haven't found a taker yet. His salary is a little bit of an albatross, but not nearly as some of the other worst contracts in the NBA. But for him, it's all about the shooting numbers and his size. His numbers are down, which is why his value is down right now in the league. And so I still think there's an opportunity for a team willing to take a chance on him. But as of right now, things don't look good for him to remain in Toronto for the long term. As for the Pascal Siakam rumors, I wouldn't put much stock into them unless they're getting a star-level player back. I'm holding on to Pascal Siakam. He's very good on both ends of the floor. He's kind of my one link to the championship run that we had along with Fred VanVleet, but I think Siakam is a better long-term piece for them than Fred VanVleet. The other piece at the trade deadline to keep your eyes peeled for is OG Anunoby. If a team comes out there and meets that asking price of 3 first-round picks, which is possible, but I certainly wouldn't do it, then we could see a move for OG Anunoby. He's a very good number 3 option on a team. I would not trust him to be my second leading scorer or my number 1 star. And for 3 first-round picks, that's what you're saying the value of OG Anunoby is. I would be more comfortable with 2 first-round picks, or including a quality veteran. I mentioned the possibility of Dorian Finney-Smith and a first-round pick, maybe some smaller assets to kind of finish off the deal. Something like that would be a nice type of a deal for OG Anunoby. Other teams out there might be able to propose some type of a similar deal, something in that framework, a quality role player to take the role of OG Anunoby on the team, and a pick in return. Something like that is where I think ultimately his price will settle. The question is that enough for the Raptors to trade him? For me, if I'm the Raptors, I hold on to him. I think the value is about right at 2 first-round picks, but even at that price, I still wouldn't move him. So as far as the asking price being 3 first-round picks, I guess to blow me out of the water, I suppose. But I still would prefer to hold on to him. I really liked him coming out of the draft, one of the best shooters coming out that year, and he's really developed on both ends of the floor since coming into the NBA. He looks very good for your Raptors. So hopefully that answers your question, Cheesy. If you have other questions about your favorite team, please feel free to send them to us. We haven't really touched on the Lakers other than to mention that they've been looking to make additions to LeBron to that team around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. However, they are outside of the play-in looking in right now, and I think they've got a very high uphill climb to get back into contention in the Western Conference. We're just talking about them possibly being in the play-in right now. If that's where you're at right now with the LA Lakers, that tells me you should be going the opposite direction. I would be selling right now, but unfortunately you cannot trade LeBron James because he's signed that extension. So you cannot trade him until the offseason. But if I'm the LA Lakers, I would seriously think about blowing it up and just trying to start over, start from scratch, and see if we can get some momentum going that way. Appreciate it, Cheesy. Thank you. Just going to check in on one other thing for you guys. Saw something pop up. We haven't mentioned the New York Knicks anyway. They've had some rumors around Emmanuel Quigley. We've also seen some rumors around Cam Reddish about them possibly selling one or both of those pieces. Quigley's had a very nice year on that team, but right now their point guard of the future and of the present right now is Jalen Brunson. I wonder about the fit for Quigley long term. Derrick Rose is on that team right now. I think he could easily be moved. They're trying to work out some type of conclusion for him, working with him to try to get it solved. They're not just going to send him somewhere to let him languish, say to like Oklahoma City, just to eat the money, that kind of thing, and then have him be bought out. It sounds like they're trying to work with him to find a destination that works. And so a team that needs a veteran, say like the Orlando Magic, I've seen them express interest in him. They're not going to be in the playoffs, and I think that would be a nice fit with the Orlando Magic. I just think he wants to go to more of a playoff team, and so I think that Derrick Rose could be an option to move here at the deadline if you're a New York Knicks fan. One player who hasn't played yet is Jay Crowder. He's been away from the team anyway, and basically was very unhappy about essentially being told, hey, you're out of the starting lineup immediately after the season concluded this last year anyway, that his role in the offense, the role on the team was being taken over by Cam Johnson. Understandably, they want to go with their own in-house guy, but Jay Crowder is still a very productive player. They signed him in free agency to that 3-year, $30 million deal, and they're still looking to trade him for a pretty penny. Now, because he hasn't played all year, I don't think they're going to be able to get that pretty penny. I think they're going to get basically a second-round pick, maybe a couple of them, or they can use it as salary filler for a bigger deal to try to bring in somebody of with some playoff pedigree into that lineup to replace Jay Crowder's production, somebody who gives them some depth at that 3 spot. But we'll see what happens with the Suns. There were some rumors, of course, in the offseason that they would be bringing in Kevin Durant, but of course they decided to go ahead and keep DeAndre Ayton after the trade with Durant didn't work out. I would have thought at that time that they might be able to circle back around to Kevin Durant here at the trade deadline. But the Brooklyn Nets have been fantastic so far this year. They're right at the top of the Eastern Conference, and I see no way of that happening right now. So something that the Phoenix Suns may have been hoping for when they signed that big mega deal with DeAndre Ayton was flipping him for Kevin Durant during the season, and that's just not going to happen. They're going to have to stick with those contracts that they've signed with Chris Paul, Booker, Ayton, and among others as well. Will you be live when spring training starts to talk about spring training games? Games, probably not, but I will be live quite a bit, breaking down a lot of the spring training action as far as depth charts, health, etc. We're going to see a lot of transactions as well during spring training, so kind of keep your eyes peeled for a lot of the moves to designate players for assignment. Another player gets picked up, etc. Welcome back, Bush Girl. Appreciate you for joining us. Warriors have been in the news today. They're said to want to hold on to their trio of draft pick prospects that they got from their recent downslide in the standings over the past few years. They brought in James Wiseman, Moody, and Kuminga during their backslide, if you will, and they're expected to hold on to all three. And understandably, I would hold on to Kuminga, I would hold on to Moody, but Wiseman hasn't really shown us anything here in the NBA, If the Warriors wanted to make a move for, say, a Jay Crowder, somebody who gives them some depth, somebody who kind of brings them some defense, 3-point shooting, a little bit of size and toughness, that could be something that would make sense. And with Wiseman going back to the Suns as well, there was a 5-team rumored trade around December 4th or 5th anyway, that we were discussing during the MLB winter meetings about John Collins or possibly ending up in either Houston or San Antonio, Podol being traded somewhere, Eric Gordon being traded to the Warriors, with Kuminga and Wiseman and Moody all being sent out to either the Rockets or Spurs. That's not going to happen right now. Nobody's willing to trade for John Collins' contract right now. We touched on that at the top of the video. Warriors are looking for size, defense, and 3-point shooting. So that's kind of what they're looking for during this trade deadline season. So keep your eyes peeled for who might become available. The market for Cam Reddish, we talked about from the New York Knicks. Sounds like the Lakers, Bucks, and Mavs are all interested in him, according to Mark Stein. Mark Stein, of course, started his career in Dallas, or more recently has been in New York. So you can kind of see the connections there. He's got very good sources on both teams. We'll see which team ultimately ends up getting him, but I think he'd be a good fit in all three spots. I think Milwaukee might be the surprising winner there if Cam Reddish is traded. I think he would give them exactly what they need as far as kind of a versatile wing, somebody who can play a little bit of defense, fits exactly what that Bucks team really needs right now. They have enough size, in my opinion. I see some articles out there saying that they should trade Brook Lopez. I don't think they should. I think the rotation with Lopez and Portis at the top is something other teams are going to have some fits with it, or in the playoffs, especially with Giannis on your team. But I think Cam Reddish should be a nice buy low candidate for them. That's not going to cost them a whole lot. You think the Phillies are going to go with pitching? Do you think we need a bat or something before the start of the 23 season? Every team, I think, could use a bench bat, somebody who could kind of fill in a role. Think of what the Mets did with Tommy Pham, giving him a 1-year, $6 million deal to be their fourth outfielder. I still think the Mets need to improve that offense just a little bit more. As for the Phillies, I still think there's some holes in that lineup. I really love the addition of Trey Turner, though, and he's going to be fantastic for that team. So keep your eyes peeled for how good that division is going to be this year. But I think Philadelphia is pretty much going to stand where they're at right now, unless some opportunity falls into their lap. The San Antonio Spurs have Jakob Podol on the trade block right now. Asking price for him, according to Shams, is 2 first-round picks. Now, the Boston Celtics and the Toronto Raptors are two teams that have expressed interest in him in the past and still have maintained that interest. Now, the surprising part here is that the Celtics are certainly at the top of the Eastern Conference, while the Raptors, well, they're vying for the play-in at this point. I'll be curious to see if the Raptors decide to do a little bit of buying and selling here at the deadline, bringing in Podol, sending out Van Vliet, possibly bringing him back in free agency. We'll see how things work out. But 2 first-round picks is a little rich for my blood for a player in Podol anyway, who I would think might be my starting center. Really impacts the defensive end of the floor. Really good rebounder. Not exactly a liability on offense either, but he's not exactly my go-to option there either. I would be very leery of trading 2 first-round picks for a player who's, while good, is not necessarily a, front-line starting center in your league right now, especially when you go up against some of the other, big-time centers in the NBA. I think he's going to fall off a little bit as far as the value, just because I think he's been overvalued for so long. Now I think is the time for the Spurs to try to cash in on that value right now and see if they can salvage that and get that price of 2 first-round picks. If they do, they continue to add to their treasure chest after that DeJounte Murray trade. But we'll see what ends up happening with him and the Spurs. But the Celtics, they have a very good team right now. They could use some size on the inside. If they view Podol as kind of that defensive stopper on that end of the floor without giving them too much of a liability on offense, I think that could be a team that would see the value in giving up 2 first-round picks for him, but they would probably need something in addition to Podol to be able to get that price to be met. We haven't talked about the Charlotte Hornets yet. There's been a lot of rumors for probably the better part of a year now around Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward. Hayward, of course, has struggled with his injuries. We saw the gruesome injury he had with the Boston Celtics. He had another long-term injury or two now with the Charlotte Hornets. But Terry Rozier has had a very nice year for them. He could be a nice player on the trade block this year. Good ball handler, has some decent shooting numbers, but can be a little streaky at times, much like Tim Hardaway Jr. So kind of buyer beware when you get Terry Rozier. Is kind of a leader on the floor for you as well. So if you need some leadership, intangibles, those kinds of things, Rozier might be the player for you. Of course, Gordon Hayward has that big-time contract out there, $28+ million, I believe, is what he's owed this year, and still has some time left on that deal as well. I'd be curious to see if a team's willing to take the risk in it. I wouldn't do it because of the injury risk and, of course, the money. But Terry Rozier would be the piece I would want from the Charlotte Hornets. They have long been looking for a center. Now they've added one in the draft anyway. They're trying to build them around LaMelo Ball, and they just need to get some type of chemistry built up. They tried it. They had something really good going last year with Miles Bridges, but of course this offseason he entered restricted free agency, was expected to get a max contract offer. Then the domestic violence issues happened. He has since figured out those issues, but he's still not near that level of impact for the Hornets right now. And maybe they get something done with him, but for right now, they need something to kind of start going their way. They have not had a good year so far this year. On the other hand, the Indiana Pacers have had a nice year so far. Rick Carlisle's really got them playing well. Tyrese Halliburton looks like a star in this NBA. He's a very good, assist guy. His shooting numbers have improved as well. And the trade for Domantas Sabonis, at the time, everybody was saying, "Why did you give up such a good young talent?" Well, now we understand why the Pacers decided, instead of going for the draft picks, that's why they wanted Tyrese Halliburton. They wanted a cornerstone of their franchise. Rick Carlisle loved him when he was with the Dallas Mavericks during that draft anyway, and absolutely wanted him on his team. When the opportunity came about, he said, "Hey, what do I have to do to get it done?" And they did it. And so now they got their cornerstone. They've had a couple of good young rookies this year step forward. They've got a nice young nucleus going, and if they can just continue to develop that young talent, they could really have something in about a year. So keep your eyes peeled for big things that are happening with the Pacers. See if there's any other news items I haven't mentioned yet. I did mention that the Wizards are certainly looking to make some moves here at the deadline. They are looking to add pieces around their core three that they view they have right now in Kuzma, Beal, and Porzingis. They are not a winning team right now. They're struggling to make the play-in. We'll see if they ultimately make it, but I think even if they traded some of their bigger pieces on that roster, they'd still have an outside chance to make the play-in. So if I'm the Washington Wizards, unless I'm getting a star point guard, unless I'm getting a star center, something like that, I'm not trying to buy pieces this trade deadline season. I'm not trying to add around the periphery of my team. I'm not making the penny ante moves of a Will Barton or a Monte Morris, things like that. I think wholesale changes are ultimately going to be necessary in a year or two for the Wizards, but for right now, I'd probably move off of Kyle Kuzma because it sounds like he wants to test free agency and ultimately sign elsewhere this offseason, try to capitalize on his value, try to capitalize on Hachimura's as well, build around Beal and Porzingis, see if you can get somebody in there in free agency. You have a good center in Gafford, you have a decent point guard in Monte Morris, but they need some extra juice in that lineup, so keep your eyes peeled for what ultimately happens with the Wizards. But you guys feel free to send us your requests. If you have a team that you're curious about the latest trade potential, what could happen here, what could happen there, let us know, and we'll see if we can answer your questions for you. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. We'll get some videos out for you guys here in the next 24 hours, so keep your eyes peeled. Hit that subscribe button, join us here at the Upside, and we'll keep you guys updated every single evening on the latest from the NBA trade deadline. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. You guys can check that out and find our Facebook page, Upside Sports Network. And we'll keep you guys updated. Whenever something happens, we'll post it there on Twitter. That way, if you don't get the notification from YouTube, since they limit you as far as how many notifications you get from us, we'll go ahead and keep you guys updated through there as well. But thank you guys for joining us tonight, and we'll see you guys tomorrow evening.